Well, good morning, everybody. I guess I'll turn the mic on here. That'll help. Morning, everybody. Morning. Thank you. And good morning to the people on Zoom, and welcome back. This is going to be our third presentation in the series on aging well, and it's put on by the UVRA Elder Academy along with the Institute of Aging and Lifelong Health. Again, my name is Dave Doherty, in case you've forgotten, because I wasn't here last week. And I'm on the program committee for the UVRA Elder Academy. And I'd like to start by acknowledging respectfully that we are gathered here today on the territories of the Lekwungen and the Wasanich nations. Again, I'd like to thank Joanne Miller, the research manager for the Institute of Aging and Lifelong Health, who has actually lined up the speakers for this series. And also thank this organization, which is the Cordova Bay 55 Plus. I think John Anderson said it was the Cadbury Bay 55 Plus. No, it's the Cordova Bay 55. I'm not even sure they have a 55 plus in Cadbury Bay. Anyway, for allowing us to use the facilities once again. And today, a special thanks to Von Bishop, who is helping with all the technical stuff with the Zoom and this hybrid presentation, which, I think most of you know presents its own unique challenges, and we have a unique challenge today that I'll share with you in a minute. Anyway, and also my wife Angie, who has put all together the coffee and the cookies, and compliments, of course, of the UVRA. So before I introduce today's speakers, a few housekeeping items. And one is to turn off all digital devices, please. And if you're at home on Zoom, you'll see that we've actually muted you to avoid unintended interruption. We'd also ask you to turn off your videos, just in case you inadvertently pop up on the screen in kind of clothing that you may not want to be seen in public. And then after about 45 to 50 minutes, we'll have a short break, and that'll be a chance to stretch and just get another cup of coffee and then do what needs to be done. Know that the toilets are just outside on the left as you leave this particular building. For those on Zoom, we ask you to submit comments using the chat box, and we will post them on your behalf. We'll be monitoring that. However, if you do wish to ask or make a comment in personally, if you let us know on the chat box, then we would invite you then to turn on your video and your audio, and that again avoids kind of unnecessary interruption. So if you could do that, that would be terrific, and we'd certainly like to see you and hear you if that's your wish. Okay, and a final reminder that all these presentations have in fact been recorded, and they are uploaded onto YouTube, and Sanjit will send out those links to everybody, usually 2 or 3 days after the presentation. It takes a while to upload it and to edit it and put it up so that it's accessible to you. And we also have the presenters who kindly make the slides available. So if you want to go through and review the slides that they've shared, again, a day or two after, that information will be up, this time on the UVRA website, but Sanjit will also send out the link to you, both for the actual video recording as well as the PowerPoint slides. So I think that's all I need to say by way of housework stuff. So it's now a pleasure for me to introduce the first of our 2 speakers today. Right? So it's kind of neat that we have 2. So you're getting 2 for the price of 1. Yeah, you don't get too many better deals than that, do you? And the first person presenting is Stacey Horton, and she's been creating original works for over 25 years. She's a graduate of the dance and theater from Simon Fraser University. Stacey uses a multidisciplinary approach to making and performing new pieces. Her work has been presented in Western Canada and Seattle by Dancing on the Edge, Gambling Souls Productions, Calgary's Dance Explosion, Seattle's Under Construction series, and in Victoria by Bounce, Suddenly Dance Theatre, and Dance Victoria. Stacey is the winner of Dance Victoria's 2018 Crystal Dance Prize for Independent Artists. Her most recent work, Concussion, was workshopped and presented in Berlin in August 2018 at Artist Studios. In 2019, she premiered Concussion in Victoria in 4 sold-out performances and then remounted it at the University of Victoria for the 2019 Brain Injury Awareness Week. So Concussion was produced in partnership with the Cridge Centre to the family through a CRD equity grant. And I kind of apologize a little bit in advance here. It's always bad to start a presentation with an apology, but we've had a little problem somehow connecting sound to the video. Those on Zoom actually will hear the sound much better than those of us that are here. For whatever reason, we can't get the sound working through our speaker system because Zoom seems to somehow take over. You know, it's kind of one of these little gremlins out there that we can't seem to control it. But what we can do is to run it on the computer, and it will be the sound on the computer for those of us here. All right, unfortunately, that's not going to be very loud, so listen very carefully. It won't be very loud. But you're on Zoom, you will be absolutely fine. So, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Stacey Horton.
Good morning, everyone. This is my very first hybrid presentation, so thank you so much to David and the UVRA for the invitation. You guys, they've been working to try to get this sound thing going, and so thank you. I appreciate it. But there is one advantage to you folks that are actually here in person. I have been handing out memories to everyone. And so I have a box of ping pong balls with memories on them just for those who are on Zoom. Is there anyone in the room who did not receive a memory? Oh, Vanna, Mauricio, please. Thank you. I can step forward as well. Pick
you up better that way.
Awesome, thank you. So it's my pleasure to be here with Mauricio today to talk about concussions, talk about my experience as an artist and creating a dance piece that was called Concussion. I presented it, as you heard, in 2019 here in Victoria at the Intrepid Theatre, and then also at the University of Victoria. And so it was this amazing by chance where Mauricio and I met right at the beginning of my creative process when it was about 2017, and I had just spoken with my mentor, Gabby Baer from Berlin, and she said, I think it's ready for you to do a new dance, Stacey. And I was thinking I wasn't quite ready, but she encouraged me, and that's when Concussion was born, and we crossed paths and had this passion for dance, both of us, as well as the history of the brain and Mauricio's research, of course, which you will hear a lot about later. So I want to share a little bit about my background in dance, and then I will share some stories of my concussions, and then you'll get to see some video of the live presentation. My apologies, I was hoping that this would be somehow a live performance, but yeah, between COVID and this, that, and the other thing, here we are today. So doing our best to share the live performance with you in the video format. So yes, I grew up in Calgary. I started dancing when I was 8, which was quite late. I took ballet, which I was very drawn to because it was very precise, and I appreciated the technique, but also the discipline of dance. And it was probably one of the safest activities that I did, because as a child growing up, I pretty much was involved with every sport. I was an athlete. I played baseball, volleyball, water skiing, you name it, I did it. I, of course, close to the mountains, mountain biked, went skiing in the winter. So it was just this wonderful upbringing. And from listening to the other presentations, I am so grateful, because I realized that that experience of moving my body so much as a young person has really just kind of set me up for the rest of my life. However, through all that activity and some of it being a little bit more risk-taking than others, I suffered concussions. And my first concussion was when I was 8 years old. I was learning to downhill ski on the rope toe. which I think many of us in the room know the rope tow. I don't know if the young people these days know the rope tow. So you're going up the hill, you're holding on to the rope, and the instruction I was given was no matter what, don't let go of the rope. So I'm going up the hill and I fall. So the rope is now above my head and I'm going up the hill. No helmets in this day. Bang, 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 no matter what, I do not let go of that rope. So after my ski day, I ended up with a terrible headache. And in the early 80s, nobody was able to say, you've had a concussion. But from then on in, I was a kid who suffered from bad headaches, from migraine headaches. Jump ahead to when I graduated from high school, I moved off to New York City. I decided to commit my life to dance, left some of the sports behind, and I was going past the university every day. Every day I was just on my own, taking ballet, jazz, contemporary dance, any opportunity to just broaden my horizons in the dance world. But as I crossed past the university, I saw the students outside and I thought, oh, even though it was 1 year after high school, I didn't want to miss out of that experience of going to university. So though I vowed I would never study dance in university, that was the moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go to SFU. I'm going to take dance. And then as I was in my program, I chose to move on to take theater as well. I had some back injuries that I was dealing with. So the whole experience of being at the School for the Contemporary Arts at Simon Fraser provided me with working very collaboratively. It introduced me to interdisciplinary arts and made me the artist that I am today. So I'm grateful for that education. Fast forward now to my second concussion. This time we were at Kalamalka Lake. And I think somebody maybe has the Kalamalka Lake memory in the audience here. Tubing. Don't let people go tubing behind a boat. So my experience was having a great time, ready to say, all done, cut, do the signal, thank you very much, and didn't get to that point where I called the timeout early enough. The driver took one last whip of the boat and the tube went coasting across the wake. I was there with somebody probably 3 times my weight, where his body weight pushed the side of the tube down. I went flying through the air, smashed headfirst into the water. And I was certain I had broken something. So I'm lying there in my life jacket doing is my arm broken? Is my neck broken? I'm okay. How is it I'm okay? I don't feel okay. But everything seemed to be working. So, okay. Next morning, things were foggy. I had a headache. And now, 25, 30 years later, my partner said, you have a concussion. So that's how much we've now become a little bit more strained with the understanding. So my doctor's advice, as my migraines continued and got worse, was no matter what, don't hit your head again. Yeah, good advice, right? Well, 3 times a charm. So the hopefully last concussion was, I was working on a production. It was for an outdoor performance here in Victoria at the City Hall. We had these giant PVC pipe sets. They were created by the amazing Catherine Hahn, and we were working with Jennifer Maskell from Vancouver. So we were preparing to present the next week at City Hall. We were at Beacon Hill Park. We were rehearsing. It was July the 4th. It was warm out. I was exhausted. and we're moving around these sets, and there was a moment where one of them falls over, smacks me across the head with the pipe, and I kept going as I do, and then of course we all know what happens, the repercussions by the next day and the headaches. And so it's funny, you might all remember July 5th, 2015, or not, but it was one of the days where the sky was orange here and the smoke was really thick. So I got out of bed, looked outside, had fog in my head, saw smoke on the horizon and orange sky, and I thought, something is wrong. Something is really wrong. And that was the moment that my life actually changed. That was the final concussion that, yeah, made things difficult. So it took a few years to kind of get back on my feet. And that was the moment when Gabby Bayer said, okay, Stacey, it's time. Your next piece is called Concussion. So going back into the studio was this amazing release, and I could be in my body, expressing myself, and out of my head, which was causing a lot of disturbance in the days. I had difficulty with groups. I had difficulty with screens, cognitive functioning. And once I got back in the studio and back into my body, all of that just melted away. So it was an amazing experience of feeling at home. And that's where this piece began. And I'd love to show you some clips from it now. I'm just going to quickly go through, as I've not been reading my entire script here, just ad lib. Yeah, so introducing this work. It is presented at the Intrepid Theater, this production. This was 2019. Gaochen Wang did the video that you'll be seeing today. The speaker in the first clip and the other clips is Kevin Kerr. Kevin Kerr is at your University of Writing. He's the chair. He's also an actor, a director, a writer in theater. And the soundscape is performed live from David Parfit. He has pre-recorded clips that he then mixed live for the production. The production was in the round, and I think that's about all you know. You're welcome to ask any questions as we go along. I'm going to stop and start. So introducing the first clip. Are we ready? Is the brain. I call this section the brain. I'll let you watch it. Hopefully you can hear some of it. We can pause it there, please. How are we doing for sound? Did our people at home get to hear it? Okay, awesome. Yes, so this is the brain. That is the first section. And what I'm working with is physicalizing the idea of synapses and connectivity and imagining the healthy working brain. So as it moving through my body with ease and seamlessly. The next clip is, again, a piece of the set. It's a plastic shell with a grocery bag and filled with ping pong balls, such as the ones I handed out today, each with a memory written on it. You'll notice the shaking of this brain-like thing, of course, reflecting the shaking of the head or the trauma, and then a gathering of the memories. So once I get them, I want to contain them in a hoop and hold on to the preciousness and the memories that I have without letting them scatter. So Catherine Hahn was the one who came up with the ping pong ball idea. And we had many, many, many ping pong balls throughout this production, and they would always be scattering across the stage. And it was my job to gather them and try to hold on to them. So this is just one small section with the ping pong balls. Okay, you can pause. Thanks. I can't seem to do it with my mouse here. Thank you. The next section is one of my favorites. So I actually brought the set piece in the car, and then I was juggling it around, and I thought, no, you'll get a better view of the set piece from the video. So I didn't bring it in, but what it is a hula hoop, and it's got dangling golf balls from it, and the golf balls spin on little cords, and the hula hoop is hanging, so it's moving around. And this was Catherine's creation of an MRI machine, which she actually took from some work that I had been doing in the studio. That little blue hoop, I had this moment where I managed to get my entire body through it, and I was mimicking coming through the MRI machine. And so then she translated that and created this hula hoop version of it, which was very serendipitous, because when Mauricio and I were reflecting on the show later on, he said, actually, this is quite symbolic, quite representational of what an MRI machine does. So I'm going to let him talk about that later, which I find very exciting. The clip goes from the MRI section into the dance of memories. So it's the more movementy part that's a little bit more lyrical, and where I learned that everything is actually okay. I go back to the times in my life where pre-concussion things were easy, and it's with ease. So the concussion being that moment of impact that changes that. And pause, please. So that just reminds me of how one of my greatest fears as these concussions built up was losing my memory and losing my memories. So as you can see, going back and reflecting on the preciousness of those memories was always very important to me. So I described a little bit about that moment of after the tubing incident where I was checking to see what was broken or what if I was okay. That's what leads us into this next clip. We have just a few more to go. So there are a few clipped together where they're all just reflective of what I'm struggling with. So once the concussion symptoms are involved with my life and day-to-day processing, the struggles, the feeling pushed down when I try to stand up. Those are all the emotions and experiences that I've kind of embedded in these next sections. So yeah, we'll just play them.
Remember as many of these words as you can. Backpack, oily, seagull, darkness, hungry, excited.
And just pause right there, please. And this final bit, so moving out of the struggles, the last part just is a demonstration of the coup contre coup motion. So Kevin is describing how on impact the brain moves within the cortex or within the skull. And when the moment of impact, the brain bounces back and hits on either side inside of the head and the skull specifically. So I mimic that through my physicality.
The brain holds a memory. The brain moves the shell. Shell carries the brain. The shell is moving. The brain is moving. The shell
Thank you. So that's not actually the end of the piece. It ended on a little more of an uplifting, more hopeful note. So I suppose in conclusion, my hopefulness comes out of the continuous recovery that I'm experiencing from my concussions, and not only showing how continuing to be active in my life, but also the community building that presenting this work has provided. So first off, with Mauricio and learning so much about the brain, the connection that I had with the Cridge Center for the Family, and specifically the Brain Injury Awareness Center that's there. Jeff Singh and Janelle Biagioni were amazing in supporting this work, and they had their supporters and their people that came out and volunteered at my production, and we shared stories, and just the number of people that have come to me saying, oh, I have either a similar experience, or I know somebody, or just it just explodes, right? So it makes me feel not alone, and shows how art reflects life and has a healing way of it. So thank you very much. I appreciate sharing this with you. Yeah. Mauricio is pointing to the memories, and so if anyone wants to share the memory you have with you here in the room, I can tell you a little bit about it, or we can leave the mystery to be had. Are there any memories that people want to call out? Inflatable pool. Well, there are two stories with that one. I created a dance with an inflatable pool for the Fire Hall Art Center. And the other inflatable pool was my daughter was born in the second floor apartment in an inflatable pool that the landlord had to empty when we were whisked off to the hospital for it to all complete. So that's the inflatable pool. Yes.
Falling through the ice.
Falling through the ice. I told you I'm from Alberta. My mother grew up in Vilna in northern Alberta, and they have these really big ditches. So I was small enough that I was, stomping on the ice in the ditch, but when the ice cracked, I fell through and literally was almost drowning in the ditch. So my lovely Baba pulled me out and took me into the bathtub and saved me from freezing in snowy Alberta. Thank you. Gourdon, yeah. So somewhere in there, I traveled to France by myself, and this small little town in France, Gourdon, was a relative from Germany and his best friend, and they put me up for, I think, 10 days and fed me and housed me, and it was just so lovely that Gourdon. Provincial championships, that was volleyball, high school. All 4 teams won from our high school. Auntie D. So Auntie D, she never had children. We were Auntie D's people, and it was always so exciting when Auntie D would come up from California, but so exciting that I got a headache every time because I got so excited that Auntie D was coming, the fun auntie that had no children of her own. Christian Horse Camp. Oh, this is kind of a bittersweet one. My friend that was at Christian Horse Camp was picking on me, and I managed to really connect with one of the counselors at the camp when I was having a lot of really difficult times. So yeah, I fondly think of the person who kind of saved me at the Christian Horse Camp, which seems to be fitting, doesn't it? Oh dear. Okay, so you've already nailed me on this one. Apparently it's cream tea from my travels in England on my way to France. And the story goes on though. So I was by myself. I thought, cream tea, doesn't that just sound fantastic? It had been raining. All I wanted to do was cozy up inside and have some lovely tea with cream. And so I was also a little bit hungry. So I ordered a Stilton sandwich with the cream tea. And the server, a young woman, very friendly, says to me, would you like both the cream tea and the sandwich? And I said, yes, please, I'm hungry, so I'll have the tea and the sandwich. And she says, would you like the sandwich before the tea or with the tea or after? And I'm thinking, I don't know, it doesn't matter. All together. And so lo and behold, I didn't realize cream tea came with cottage cream and scones, and it was like a meal in itself. And then this Stilton sandwich, I had no idea was blue cheese, this big, thick, and I had all this food in front of me that I literally wrapped up the Stilton in my napkin and put it in my bag because I couldn't possibly leave all of this. But the sweet waitress who was serving me said, you're traveling on your own, you poor thing, come stay with my family. Like cream tea turned into, here, welcome to our place. So I'm sure you don't need to hear any more of my stories. I still can remember them, so it's all gonna be okay. Oh, Guido's snowmobile. Okay, yeah, again, Vilna, Northern Alberta. We used to make jumps for the snowmobile to go over in the backyard, which was the field. Nobody got hurt.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in you know, obviously your experiences with concussion, but it strikes me that it may be similar for people with stroke and recovering from stroke similar to recovering from concussion. Can you kind of draw any parallels with that?
Only from what people have also told me, in the way of I had the personal experience of losing a sense of self. And I believe I understand that when someone has a stroke and they lose part of themselves, the functioning that they're familiar with, that there is a similarity. And we're also dealing with the brain. Maybe Mauricio can answer that question better. But I think also dementia, the wanting to hold on to our memories, that same struggle of and then connecting it to our aging, right? So the constant question that I'm asking myself is it me or is it the concussion that I've got these life challenges? So I wonder if somebody who's recovering from a stroke is dealing with what's regular aging or if it's the stroke.
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued with it, you know, capturing memories, not just on table tennis ball, but just the idea of capturing your memories and actually writing them down somewhere, which, you know, they're obviously very precious. And I'm just kind of wondering, you know, as an older audience, you know, it's something that, you know, maybe we can think about is so that we do have these memories and we can go back and, like you, enjoy the memory, you know, once that memory is triggered by this, you know, like stimulus, I guess, of writing it down.
Yes, and how can we hold on to those memories? What is it? Is it through storytelling? Is it through writing them? Is it through mementos? What is it? Nice, thank you. Hi.
I have a question about, have you done any research or studying about the treatment that hockey players, the drugs he went through when he suffered brain concussions, but was able to get that?
The question is, yeah, have I done any research specifically to what the hockey players are? No, I haven't specifically researched. So are you referring to the inflammation, help me out, Mauricio. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Is that the question specifically?
Concussions that he suffered playing hockey.
And the concussions he suffered playing hockey.
They thought his career was over, and he's a brilliant hockey player. But he had some very experimental treatment that allowed him to get back playing concussions.
Oh wow! So I don't have any experience with the treatment that he did. I've recently read a book about some treatment going down in the US that actually some film directors have gone through that they have found to be incredibly successful. It's amazing. There's so much, right? It's getting better and better all the time. So I probably should. what I've learned about my recovery is it's so personal that one of the things I did was floating in one of those float house tanks and meditating, that just calming my brain down. So, you know, medically, I'm sure, yes, they're advancing immensely, but for me, learning tools and learning that my brain is plastic, or plasticity, has plasticity, that it can recover, and what I need to do. Yeah.
Have you managed your headaches?
Have I managed my headaches? Mostly. I've again entered a new phase where hormonally my headaches are showing up at different times. So is it just me? Am I prone? But I've managed them better. Yes, I've managed them better than I have. There are still things that trigger my headaches. Yeah, thanks.
The library bake contest.
Okay, one more story. This one almost makes me cry because it makes my mom so upset. The library bake contest. I was in kindergarten. The library was announcing a bake contest. I could barely read, but I could bake. I was really into baking. So I said to my mom, I'm going to make a carrot cake, which is actually, I'll tell you the second part of the story later, but the cake that my mom is making me for my birthday on Monday, she's bringing it all the way from Calgary, the same carrot cake. So I knew how to make this cake, but I had a little bit of difficulty reading the recipe. So my mom helped me a little bit with the recipe, but other than that, I made the cake. I made the cake, I iced the cake, I entered it in the contest, and it makes me cry every time. I don't know why. My mom was around when the judging was happening, and one of the judges said, oh, there's no way a 5-year-old could have made this cake. And I guess it's so dear to me because it affects my mom that she kept her mouth shut. She didn't say anything, but she was like, well, my child did. She made it all on her own, and she just had to hold that in. And so that's the bake sale that I didn't win. We good? Should we take a break?
I think we'll take a break.
Let's take a break. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing some of those very personal moments in your life. I think everybody can relate to them to a degree. And we're going to take a short break now, so we'll be back by 5 to 11. So stretch your legs, there's more coffee and stuff at the back, and do what you need to do. And we will return in about 8 minutes. Thank you. So I will start again in 1 minute, please. 1 minute, we'll start again. Thank you. This will kind of want to switch Yeah, that's true.
Does that mean that we're not credit cards in the other parts? No, no.
Okay, we'll get going again, please. So again, thanks so much, Stacy, for a very different kind of presentation. You know, it kind of makes us think outside of our box and think of things in a very different way. So we thank you for sharing that with us, because it's obviously very, very personal, and sometimes those things are very difficult to do. But you did a really nice job, so thank you for that. I should also just comment at this time to thank Sanjit Roy. Now, you don't even see Sanjit Roy. You know, he operates out of an office, but Sanjit is the guy that sends out all the stuff related to Elder Academy. He kind of uploads this stuff and he sends it out to you on email. He sets up the things on Eventbrite for registration. So Sanjit is a grad student at UVic, and he's been working with the UVRA for a couple of years now, and he does a really terrific job. So I know you're out there, Sanjit. He's actually recording this, and he will upload it instead of John Arduini this time. So thank you, Sanjit, for all the help that you've given UVRA, particularly over the last couple of years. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marcin, I've got to get this like, Mauricio Garcia Barrera. That's pretty close, I think. He's a native of Medellin, which is in Colombia. So it's kind of nice to have somebody here from Colombia. After completing his bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Antioquia, something like that, Antioquia, pretty close. He relocated to Georgia, USA, where he got his master's and a PhD at the University of Georgia. He's now an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at UVic. He's created the Cortex Lab, a research lab specializing in the study of the neural and the behavioral foundations of executive functioning. Now, that's not executive functioning in an office. That's executive functioning in your brain, right? So just to clarify, his current research focuses on the study of both clinical events and environmental variables that modify executive function. That is, our ability to problem solve, make decisions, and self-regulate across the lifespan, including physical activity and participation in sports, as well as sports related to concussions. Dr. Garcia Barrera is a member of the Sports Neuropsychology Society, has a research study currently going on investigating the effects of physical activity on cognitive performance and mood of older adults. So there are certainly topics that I know are going to be of much interest to us. And his presentation today is called Building Brain Resiliency and Healthy Aging. And the little subtitle of that is Positive Effects of Physical Activity and Concussions in the Aging Brain. I'm intrigued to know what the positive effects of concussions are. So without more ado, let me introduce Mauricio. Thank you.
English is a second language. Sometimes the grammar doesn't work so well. Can we have the slides?
You want your slides up now?
Yes, please. When we upload them, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, David, and the University of Victoria Rotary Association for this invitation. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Can we see the slides okay? Perfect. Let's see if this advances properly. So it's a little sensitive. Yeah, so now we can go to the next one now. Good. So a little bit about me. I thought, since Stacy did such a marvelous job telling us about her story, I wanted to start this talk telling you a little bit about my story, my personal story. It's very different, but I love sharing aspects of it. So I come from Colombia, as David mentioned, and for those that aren't familiar with geography, that's where Colombia is in the South American tip of this large continent. And I grew up there with a beautiful family. This is one of my brothers. We're four. And for those that don't know which one is me, I'm the one with the dark hair. My brother is really blonde. And then I moved to Georgia to do my studies at the University of Georgia, so as mentioned. There, we're known for the great sports and the Bulldogs, which just won the national championship for several years in a row. So we're very proud of the football out there. That exposed me a little bit more to the world of sports and sports concussions, because I came out from a culture where soccer was the most important sport, like our kind of football, but there was no so much concern about concussions in soccer. Now we have a better picture around it. Then I graduated. I just wanted to say, because I knew every time I get introduced, there is difficulty with all those R's. You are not alone. This is one of my best pictures of my graduation ceremony for my PhD. By the way, it was so expensive to hire a photographer. My mom tried her best. But this captures so good this moment in which the lady is about to announce me and she approached me. You can see that in the screen. And what she's asking is, how can I pronounce your name? Because it's this long in the official records. So she was really like seeing all those R's and thinking, how am I going to announce this candidate for the doctorate? But those are, those moments that we remember. And this is the second best picture. My mom was so excited, it was out of focus. It's like the moment where the president of the university checks your hand. But that's how it goes. It's a very good memory. But I was very pleased that my mom was there, because then we embarked on a whole month trip across the whole United States, in the process of like getting into Canada. So, we were moving and all of that, relocating to Victoria. My mom was able to join this 1 month in the road. So you want to get closer to your kids, do something like that, like spend a quality time past the first 3 days of awkwardness. It can really be a wonderful experience. And then, of course, the good old ferry to get into Victoria. And here am I in this beautiful location that we get to live and play with and in. And I'm a professor at the University of Victoria, in which I created the Cortex Lab. I will tell you about our research today. And the Cortex Lab is not a location, really. It's a little tiny room in UVic. It's really the group of people that make possible the research we do. So these are my amazing research assistants, grad students, postdocs, PhD students, masters, honors, undergrads, and even some of you may know here in this picture, I happen to have Miles Lowry. He's a very renowned local artist, Miles Lowry, who participated in activity for IdeaFest with us in the lab. So that was a very good experience. And we already acknowledged the land we're in. So in addition to being able to enjoy and play and learn from these traditional territories of the Lukangan, the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanix people where I live in Chinatown, I come from a land that belonged to the Catillas, the Nutavis, the Tahamies, and the Quimbaja indigenous people. So it's part of my heritage from many, many years back. It's not like a line that I can speak about, but I know that these were the groups that reside in the lands where I grew up years before colonization. Now, what do we do when we talk about executive function? David really nailed it when he told you that it's not necessarily that CEO, that executive function in an industry, in an organization. However, we borrow from that system the term executive function, because what we are going to talk about is that part of the brain that does the CEO job, that organizes our thoughts, that allows us to problem solve, to make decisions, to really self-regulate. And to do that, it needs a whole platform, a whole system to support the decision-making, the problem-solving. So this graph is very complex. I could take the whole hour just walking you through this, but very briefly, for those that are familiar with, like when we talk about genes and we talk about endophenotypes and when we talk about phenotypes, this is pretty much capturing that. So the idea here is that even though we're talking about complex behavior at the top of the chain, it is really supported by a whole chain that starts with our genes. And some of those genes are modified through the experiences we have through development, even before we're born, but also through the genes that we inherit from our parents. So those are major influences. And those genes get expressed into the formation of proteins, and the proteins collect together and form structures in the brain and in different parts of the body, but in this case, talking about the brain. And those structures communicate with each other and have functions. And that's what we call that the kind of physiology of the brain at work. And that physiology and that structure supports cognitive processing. And the interactions of all those cognitive processes like attention and processing speed and communication between neurons is what allows us to demonstrate behaviors like emotional regulation or our capacity to control our attention. And when they are together with many other processes, then we're able to express those complex behaviors like making a decision or solving a problem. They're really complex. They require a lot of computation for the brain. And in that process, we have on the far right, these environmental influences. So those environmental influences, it's important to recognize in our research that they are influencing us every day. Every day. And environmental influences could be the pandemic. It could be the physical exercise we do, physical activity. It could be participating in sports, our education. It could be the food we eat. So those are the things that we're very curious about in my lab. Now, in studying these particular environmental influences, we have become very familiar with the development and the trajectory of development of cognition in the brain, in the human life, so what we call the lifespan. And I'm aware that some of the lectures that you attended before this one have talked a little bit about this cognitive development. So this will be just 2 slides to review. We have heard of this expression, the inverted U. So this little dome that we see here, we have heard of a peak, usually around 20 to 30, we average at 25. And unfortunately, we all have heard of this imminent decline in cognitive capacity. So it's something inherent to development. It happens in all the species. It happens in ours as well. But we also have learned that this trajectory is not so linear and that there's a lot of variation. And variation could happen among individuals. So one person sitting next to you may have a completely different trajectory than your own and vice versa, but also within the different processes that the brain hosts. So each one of these color lines could be attention, another line could be memory, another line could be language, and intelligence, etc. So they don't change at exactly the same ratio. They change with different variations. And we're very curious about, how can we average that to talk about cognition as a whole, and also very curious about what happens between the stages of like 30 and 60. And I tell you what, when we study very easily children, we pay a lot of attention to them because they're in the school, they're like trapped in these little units that we can access easily. We pay a lot of attention to university students, lots of research in college university students. And there's a lot of amount of research in the aging population, older adults, seniors, because you care, because you show up, because you sign up to the studies, because we do, I sign up to everything that, if they say like, we need somebody about the 40s, I'm there. I want to understand what's happening. So we're very grateful to retirees, alumni, and all of those groups that have facilitated the research in this end of the curve. We know little about that 30 to 60. So that's one of the areas in which we're very curious as well. And also that's a very critical area to the evolution of concussions and the long-term symptoms of concussions, as we will see in a moment. Now, in studying that we have done so many different studies in my lab, this is one of the examples. This is the master thesis of now Dr. Emile Crevier-Quentin, and she's now in Ontario, Hamilton. And what she did is that she took a look into 3 cohorts of people from Victoria, a group of people from 30 to 40 years of age, a group of people 50 to 60, and a group of people in the 70 plus. And what you see is that when you see the dots from the 30 to 40 in the extreme left, all the way to the 70 plus, you do see that these lines are representing performance in a set of tasks. And you see that there is a decline. The lines are going down. However, I wanted to focus in that circle in the middle. In the age group 50 to 60, we see a lot of variation. So for some abilities, there are still gains. For some abilities, there is more decline and variation. So this is really demonstrating it's not a longitudinal study. It's not following people from their 30s all the way to their 70s. That would take 40 years, but it's comparing those groups, and they're very similar match. So you see that variation, and that's very important for us. You also see in the study that we did in Colombia with a group of executives, we're looking at the executive functions in the brain of executives to see if they have an advantage. And it's a little hard to see because the line is so thin in this projection, but let's see if my cursor works. There is a dotted, very thin line right there. I'm trying to follow with the cursor. I hope that in the screen in Zoom they can see it too. That's the average performance for the whole group of people that we assess. There were about 600 people that we assessed for these graphs, and they were between the ages of 20 to 59 years old. We're very focused in that window. And the thicker line, right here next to the thin line, is the mean for the subgroups. So when you see that little curve with the darker line shifted a little bit to the right, it means that those groups have an advantage in the performance when compared to the whole population 20 to 60. And in the last graph right there in the bottom right, you see that the thicker line is shifted to the left. So the group of 50 to 59 did not do as well when compared to the whole group. However, in context, this is not capturing wisdom, experience, all the things that this group of people in the last box have against the 20 to 25. So those in the 50 to 59 tend to have the higher positions in the company because they are the ones who are the fastest, the more efficient in making decisions for the well-being of the company. And that's not based on the performance in these kinds of computerized tasks that we did, it's based on all the cumulative experience. So what we have learned through these curves is that it's really about the allocation of resources. It's about the efficiency in the processing. It's not about accuracy or doing it fast, quickly. It's about doing it well, even if you take your time. So that has been an incredible alignment for some of the things that we have done with these populations. And we have learned through this process to care about what we call protective factors. So what are protective factors? You have heard of this in the literature, podcasts, in the news. The more educated you are, the better cognitive reserve you have in your brain. So your neurons have been kind of working harder through plasticity to learn, to acquire new knowledge, to use it, and that really helps with the cognitive reserve. Research has demonstrated that being able to speak more than one language is very good for your brain because it requires constantly using those different networks and putting the break to one network. Let's say you're speaking English every day, but you travel to Montreal and you exercise your French. So being able to put a break to the network activated in English and think in French and use that language is really good exercise for the brain. And it's demonstrated through empirical studies. And lifestyle. So Stacy is a great example of this. A lot of people were coming after her talk to say like, you look so healthy and you enjoy so much and you are so enthusiastic about this line of work. And it's exactly right. And I think my hypothesis is that the world of dance, that kind of activity that is so rich in socialization, that integrates the music with the movement of the body, is spectacular for the strengthening of the plasticity and the networks in the brain. And it's not just my opinion, there's lots of research on that. So social networks, having a group of friends, having strong relationships with family members, and those interactions are super important also for the health of the brain. Nutrition, not just the amount of calories or vitamins that we take in the food that we intake, but the research has shown that it's really about how we go about preparing it, the quality of the food that we're taking in when we're buying the market, the decision making about what am I going to cook tonight? Where do I get that one spice that is not regularly in the grocery store? How early do I need to start looking for those avocados so they're ripening enough for this one guacamole, whatever it is? So you have to plan, you have to decide, you have to make a plan step by step. You have to really discuss sometimes this with guests or family. So that's a very important aspect of nutrition. And having cognitive stimulating activities like this one. if you leave this room with any learning from the stories shared by Stacy and concussions, any of these lectures around these topics, the previews, this is very stimulating for the brain. And this is exactly the invitation that we do to all ages, to constantly be in the lookout for acquiring new knowledge through a reading, through a book, this apply actually across the lifespan. Physical activity is the one niche in which we have focused my research. And this has been because we're looking into ways to benefit these healthy brain studies, or how to create theories about what are the variables that best keep a brain healthy as we age. And as we do things in my lab, oftentimes we want to rely first in what the literature already tells us. We don't need to recreate the water, the wheel is the expression, recreate the wheel from scratch. We want to see what has been done. And it turns out that there's a lot that has been done, as you know. So there's a technique of synthesizing literature called meta-analysis. Has anyone heard of that technique? Some of you. So meta-analysis allows us to take a look at a lot of published studies and synthesize them in a way that are coherent and make sense. And why is that important? Because, well, if by the random luck you pick one article and read it, it may say, well, exercise does kind of help a little bit the brain, but not so much. And you randomly pick another article and it may say, oh, exercise is the best thing for your brain, you should do it every day. And you pick another article and may say, well, Lumosity and those kind of like games on the computer, no, so good for you. And you pick another one randomly and may say, they are the best thing created for you. So you get a sense that you're disoriented in like, what do I do if I hear the two stories competing with each other? So meta-analysis is a technique that science created to be able to compare those studies. When you control for like the sample size, so how many participants the study have, the quality of the tools they use to run the research, what were the considerations regarding gender, age, those kinds of factors that can affect the results. So we did one of those, comparing the effects of cognitive training to the effects of physical exercise in older adults. And it turned out that cognitive training, like games, like doing tasks that require immediately your cognition, are pretty good for you. But in the long term, those effects tend to fade away. So they are good for you if you're constantly engaging in cognitive training again and again, past the practice effects. So just getting better because you're doing it repeatedly. Physical exercise is equally good for you, just slightly less than the cognitive training effects, but they tend to last longer because they are going to be involved in changing through the cardiovascular system and oxygenation the brain itself. So it kind of like restructures a little bit the brain to be stronger, so those effects last a little bit longer, even if they are smaller than the immediate cognitive training. So by cognitive training, we mean, let's say you are training your memory. So the day after the training of the memory, you feel your memory is better. But maybe 3 months later, those effects have faded out a little bit. Whereas with a physical exercise, you may feel like your attention, your learning is a little bit sharp, and 3 months later, expectation according to these studies is that you still feel the sharpness. Again, though, it's important to continue those physical activities. So given that they were comparable, we understood that physical activity has a gain, and it is that it makes us hungry, because then we eat better, and we're lacking a little bit of appetite. Well, being active expends your calories, you want to eat more. You also can do it through social networks and interactions. You can go to a yoga class, you can go to a recreational center, do it with friends, go for a walk the dog, and can be cognitive stimulating because maybe you can learn new things through the physical activity. So that's what we wanted to do. And to execute that, we wanted first to have a hypothesis, as we call it in science. So what are we expecting? When we talk about these developmental trajectories and that inverted view, sometimes we can have an expectation of a norm, kind of like an average, and that's the line in the middle that is supposed to be green. I don't know if you can see a little bit of green. And the lines above and below are like the ranges in which you can be above the average or below the average, but still be normal, considered normal, like the norm, like typical. Now, if you don't have those variables of like good nutrition, good sleep patterns, good cognitive reserve, education, perhaps speaking other languages, being active, you may have a trajectory that doesn't quite get to the peak of the average. But if you have some of those variables, you may be way within that normal range. And if you have a lot of those protective factors, you may exceed. And you will say, well, but they're all declining. They're all going down anyways. Yes, but there is a big difference. You see that intersection with that vertical line. That intersection is telling us that you are passing that below the average range. So a critical point when we start feeling like, oh, should I go to the doctor to check my memory, to check my attention, I'm having difficulties learning. It's earlier if you don't have those protective factors. And it moves to a later stage in life, let's say 70 plus 80, when you have those protective factors playing on changing that trajectory. So that's why doing physical activity is very important for us in the lab. So we created a study that we call IFIT, and we recruited, you may have seen these posters all over, because we wanted to examine 8 weeks of physical activity and what were the possible effects to the brain, to mood, to stress, to fatigue, to sleep in the context of COVID. So we initially wanted to work with people in person, but we have to move everything to the online world that we're also familiar with now. And then we created this long-term training that has several components on the assessment, but one key component was a number of physical activities that we did in collaboration with Toll3, just around the corner from here. They have an excellent group of kinesiologists and physiotherapists that make these little vignettes of 30 minutes each of videos with exercises, new exercises, and we combine them with cards, like the cards that you play when you play poker. So given a card that you draw, you have to do a particular exercise, and given the number in the card, let's say 6 of hearts, you have to do 6 times that exercise. So it allows to have this interaction between the physical activity and the cognitive aspects, your exercising, working memory, and so forth. And throughout the whole process, we're assessing constantly the progress in cognitive aspects and in mood and sleep. So we have an app called Ethica that people downloaded to their phones, and every day this app will come up, ping, like a text. You click on it, and they will ask you a couple of questions for like a minute. How was your sleep last night? Have you exercised today? Have you eaten good food today? Like those kinds of questions. And every so often, people will go into the computer at home and do a little bit longer assessment battery. And all of this took up to 14 weeks. And then we have a follow-up 3 weeks later at the end of this process that you see in the line. And then 3 months later, we call them again and they did the exams again, just to see the long-term effects. This is the study that Dave, when he introduced me, was referring to. So we're still collecting data, but I'm very happy to show you some of the results of the baseline assessment and the post. So the assessment conducted immediately after the 8 weeks of exercise ended, that data we had. So we start pulling out. I have my students, my whole team this week, like, okay, I want to be able to show some results. So we work really hard to have at least initial data for you. So we're able to capture data from 104 participants across Canada. The age, you can see, the call itself was for participants 65 and up. So you can see that most of them in the density curve are between the 65 to 70, and the mean was actually 69 years of age. Most of them are white. We really welcome all kinds of diversity, but we have found that it's hard sometimes culturally to pick their interest across the nation, the people that are coming from different backgrounds. However, we're very pleased to have representation from all across Canada. So you see a significant number from British Columbia, some from Alberta, a big number also from Ontario, but we have people even from the Yukon. So that was really, really good, because it tells us that these 100 plus people representing the whole of Canada, or most of it. As usually seen in these kinds of studies, the majority of our participants are female, or identify as female in the gender question. They have a high level of education, which is typical for Canada. So 14% have some college, 50% have a university degree, 23% have a master's degree, and 4% have a PhD in our sample. So very educated. But put them through a series of questionnaires and computerized tasks that look a little bit like this one in the screen. Some of you, through the research that the Institute on Aging and Lifelong Health, in which I am a research fellow, some of you may have actually done tasks like this for other studies. So that may look familiar. And we did not only some of the questionnaires, checking out depression, symptoms, anxiety, physical activity levels, but also questions and tests for memory, attention, and executive function, as described earlier. And we did this very fancy technology called ecological momentary assessment. That is the one to the app in the phone. So every day, these questions of every day were very informative. I'll show you just a few results, and these are the tasks. One of the tasks called the Wisconsin card. This one is the one below, it's a very fun task because people are seeing on the screen a series of letters that are showing up, an N, a P, an R, an A, no particular order. But their task is, if the letter they're looking at right now matched 2 letters ago, then they have to click the keyboard. So it's hard because you're constantly N, P, N. Oh, that was 2 letters ago, I have to click. But if it's not 2 letters ago, it doesn't match, you don't click. So it's very prone to have errors and so forth. But it's a lot of fun to do it, actually, for us at least. And in this kind of analysis, in the randomized controlled trials, we separated the groups randomly into an active group and a wait-listed control, in which means that the wait-listed control, once the whole active group went through the study, we enroll them in the physical activity because we want them all to benefit from this activity. But you have to start first looking at how are the 2 groups comparable at baseline before they do the intervention. Because if they're different, it means that any change in the, given the intervention may not be explained by the intervention itself, by the exercise. I won't go into details of these fancy charts, just to show you we did the job and there were no differences between the 2 groups in most of the variables. So we didn't have concerns at pre. And we did that for the questionnaires for depression, anxiety, and executive functioning, but also on the computerized tasks. And we also have to do a post. So after we do the physical exercise. The expectation here is that, well, if only one of the 2 groups did exercise, we should have changes in the group that did exercise. So they will, at the end of the row, 8 weeks later, they should be different. So far, we have not found that they're that different. So that was a little disappointing. But it also means that the fact that we're monitoring them every day, both groups, asking them questions every day, because they were like, we'll call it active control group, meaning that they were engaged. It's not like we let them just hang in and say like, we'll contact you in 2 months. They were engaged with us. They were filling questionnaires. They were checking on their apps, in their phones. So they were really engaged with us. The only difference was that they were not doing the activity, the physical exercise. So we found no differences, but then we can do one more analysis, and is to see variable by variable within group if there were changes in those variables that we're concerned about. Just a couple of examples, because it turns out that we have like 357 variables in this database, so I will put you to sleep. But just a couple of examples. This is a scale called the GDS, a Geriatric Depression Scale, that asks about symptoms around depression in older adults. And what you see in this line on the graph on the right, my right, will be this decline. And you see the first dot is prior to the physical exercise, and the second dot is after the physical exercise. And I pulled this graph because we normally can see this kind of declining in these kinds of studies, but this one was significant. So it's not just a random change in the way that people completed the questionnaires. It's a significant, statistically significant change in the level of depression. It went down. And it was pretty low to start with, to be honest. Like our participants in the study were not depressed. There was no like a criteria to have them in the study. They were pretty fine. But among all of us, there are always 2, 3, 4 symptoms of depression that we could endorse. Because life is challenging, especially during the pandemic. People were losing peers, and it was a challenging time. For the executive function inventory, we also saw this increase. This is a subjective readiness scale where people told us how did they feel that their executive functions were like. So of course we didn't ask that question that way. We asked, how is your ability of solving problems? of making decisions. How do you feel it is in a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being really good and 1 is like, no, I have problems with that. So we see this increase from pre to post. And we see that for tests of working memory. So this capacity of the brain to hold information for a short time period and use it. So a digit backward span where we give them a number of letters and they have to give them back to us. Now, the app in the phone shows us to the daily surveying for all these 13 weeks that the active group, which is the line going up in blue, they were engaging more and more and more in exercise. So that's exactly what we wanted to see, that they were adhering to the protocol, they were doing their job, as participants in this study. And the other group, the waitlisted, started like, oh, they're asking me every day if I'm doing exercise. I should maybe do some, even though I'm not part of the active group, but they eventually declined and went back to normal levels. So you see, and that's a significant difference. So what we see in the previous slides, a little complicated, I clicked too fast, is that those gains in lowering depression symptoms, improving in decision making, improving in working memory, perhaps, and we have to do further analysis, are strongly associated with the fact that they were physically active during these 8 weeks, 2 months with our exercise routine. So we're going to decant that information to see, for instance, how sleep and stress, if the exercise helped with cardiovascular health, it may have also helped with better sleep and lowering stress, and those 2 variables can impact positively executive function, cognition, and other aspects of well-being. So we want to really look into that. Now, in further studies that we are designing now, we want to see if these effects could be seen in athletes who have been actively engaged in doing exercise through years and years and years. And like there was a question earlier about Bill Crosby and the hockey player. Like athletes are very unique populations because they exercise constantly, hours and to no end. So we don't expect that line that I just showed you to go infinite, to have a skyrocket levels of cognition because they are exercising so much. Not really. There is a plateau, there is a peak, and there's just so much gain that they can have. But in this one, it's not a video, it's just a diagram. I want to show you how the dynamics of a game sometimes can stimulate cognition. And that's what sports participation is of interest to researchers like me. So let's say that's the ball going to the player below there in white, this player. And as the ball is coming to them, they are already computing in their mind, what are they going to do with this ball? Who am I going to pass the ball to? Am I going to attempt a goal, even though the goalie there is a little bit far? And sometimes you see they just play around with the ball until they attempt the goal. Or am I going to make a pass? So all of those computations, evaluation of the environment, making a decision and solving a problem, because for the brain this is a problem, it's very highly intensely computing energy. So let's say this person evaluate, well, I could make a long pass because they see a spot, they see one of their colleagues there that perhaps could actually achieve this goal. So reward processing, emotional control, like, well, I may not be the star making the goal myself, but my peer may make it for the team if there is a better chance that that will happen. All of that constantly in a game is exercising the brain. So that's exactly what we are looking after. Then you're evaluating challenges, barriers, like, how my plan can change with people just around moving. The game is not static as this figure. They're all changing positions and moving very quickly. So that's exactly what we are looking at. But the benefits of doing sports and participating in sports could be put in a balance with some of the risks. And risk could be lesions, like orthopedic lesions. You can break a leg, you can break an arm. There are sometimes those incidents in sports. And the one that we have the spotlight today is concussion. So there's a high risk in particular sports, but across the board, of having a concussion if you're playing sports. If you're just watching TV at home and playing video games, it's likely that you won't have a concussion unless you're so disoriented and fall, for not moving much. But if you're playing sports, and there are sports that are a little bit combative, like boxing or American football, those increase the risk for concussion. So we want to see in this line of research if the benefits of physical activity outweigh the risks of concussion. So that's part of the play of words there too. It's like if the concussion, the damage produced to the brain through the concussion could be worked through, if there is a very good sense of recovery, perhaps it's worth the challenge of the sport participations with a caveat: changing the policies, protecting the youth, improving the technology of the helmets, changing the regulations of the sports themselves so that the risk is lower. That's the only way it works. No adding more risk and more athletes having concussions. And very important, identifying concussions early so we can pull the athletes from the ground, from the field, and allow them to recover before they can go back. That's what we didn't do in the past. So this next set of slides talking a little bit about this research in concussions. So again, meta-analysis, it turns out that since the buzz of concussion came out, there are so many studies that when we wanted to do one meta-analysis, guess what? There were already like 11 meta-analyses published. So my very clever student said, well, what if we do a meta-analysis of meta-analysis? And I was like, let's go for it. And there is a technology in place in the statistics for that. So that's what we did. Each one of those boxes represents one published meta-analysis, and these are all the studies covered by those meta-analyses. So that's what we attempted there, to synthesize the synthesis of many hundreds of studies. And we found that participant characteristics, time since injury, the kind of cognition aspect that you're evaluating, and if you have 1, 2, 3, or many concussions, do have an impact in the way that participants will present. When we look at cognition, almost every aspect of cognition could be affected after a concussion. So Stacy was telling us about the precious memories and having attentional problems or a little bit disorientation. But we also have learned that the time since injuries is a very important variable. Most athletes tend to recover between 7 to 10 or even 14 days. Children tend to recover between 2 weeks to 3 months. And that's very average, very normal. So they recover quite fast. In the regular population, it can go a little bit farther than that, like a normal individual that is not abnormal, but that is not an athlete, will have 2-3 weeks recovery up to a month and still be normal recovery. But if you're younger, if you have less education, and if you're a female, you have higher implications of the concussion, having higher symptoms. Executive function turned out to be the most sensitive of all of those. So self-regulation, including emotional regulation, is that capacity to problem solve, regulate your attention, make decisions, was the most vulnerable. And Stacy was showing us a dance representation of this coup contre coup. So the brain within the skull is very fragile. It's not caveat. It's not as fragile as we see it here. Because what these gifts are like made so that people use them and get like impressed for a second. What they are missing is that our brain is covered with these meninges, which is like this little fabric, this skin that is very tightly protecting the brain from this much movement inside the skull. There is still room for movement, and there is a water layer as well, the cerebrospinal fluid. But there is movement, but it's not as dramatic as this one, where the meninges are out and there is no, and this is a jelly made up brain. You see a little bit the effect. In the process of studying sports-related concussions, the field has come to many, many developments. And one that we really want to leave you with is that we have made updates to the definition of a sports-related concussion. So one of those is that it does not necessarily require an impact to the head. You could have a concussion by falling very hard on your knees, and through the bone structure, they can have a resonance into the skull and produce concussion that way. So it's a little added risk, but it was important to detect that risk. So looking into possible symptoms of concussion in athletes that have orthopedic lesions, that break the legs or something in the game. But an important progress is that we noted that it's not needed to have loss of consciousness. And that's what the LOC means, loss of consciousness. More often we think there's a concussion, it will lose consciousness. If we kind of like are pass out. but that in the 2016 consensus of the definition of concussion has been eliminated as a requirement. It adds to the sense of severity, but it's not required. Move a little faster. Now, there are other changes to these. We have improved our techniques to recognize concussions, to remove the athletes from the field, to reevaluate, to put them into a rest. Very short, only 24 hours, and then we monitor. It's not like a black room, it's not sleeping for a week. Those were early recommendations that are no longer empirically validated. Rehabilitation sometimes is needed, like the example of Crosby. Sometimes we have to refer to specialists, and we are focusing now on recovery and when it's possible to return to school, to return to sport, or to return to work, depending on the stage of life. Sometimes we have to reconsider all those decisions. We have to evaluate residual effects using techniques like neuroimaging, like the example that Stacy was sharing with us of the MRI. So in cases where there have been multiple concussions, we want to triple check that the brain is still intact, that the changes to the injury itself, even though it's a brain traumatic injury, is so small that the scanners cannot detect it. We want to make sure of that, to still call it a concussion, and we want to reduce risk. There's a very important window of recovery that we call the physiological recovery window, right there in the diagram, in which the person presents with no symptoms of concussion. The headaches are gone, they are feeling fine with their attention and learning, but the brain is working the extra mile to compensate, and that's why they don't look affected by the concussion. But the brain is still fragile, and that's the window in which we have to protect the most the athletes. And this applies not just to the sports arena, to the recovery from a concussion after a fall, in the shower or in the car after a car accident, any kind of concussion. Now, we are also focusing a lot in the guidelines to return to sport, so they are defined by stages, and what you see is this incremental evaluation. Every 24 hours, after a period of rest of one day, we kind of like check, are you doing okay? Are you doing okay? And if they say yes, you can move into the next stage in which you can add more things to your routine, more exercise, you can go for walks, then you can start practicing a little more until you are clear to go back to the high-end games. Similar staging for returning to school, and in some of the, I forgot this slide here, some of these protocols you can find in parachute.ca, that will be in the slides, is that if you have family members or interest in what are the specific protocols for the unique sports, they are actually already developed and listed. So they kind of like tailor to a specific sports, so people can be informed from that end. You can do protocol for returning to school or return to work as well. Okay, I will move along. These are just to make them available because the links and the websites are there in the slides for you later. Physicians also have protocols to make decisions about when to recommend that an athlete should be withdrawn from the game or they can continue. So these are the kinds of charts that they will follow. And oftentimes when there have been multiple concussions, they will rely on diagnostic tools. For those that do not, there is not currently any tool to diagnose concussion other than asking how the athletes feel and evaluating the balance and just checking if they're okay that way. Some neurological signs, but there is not, and we are trying desperately. There are urine exams, blood samples, MRI biomarkers, like magnetic resonance imaging based biomarkers. We have tried everything to see if we could quickly detect that the person had or not a concussion and just make decisions. Well, there is not. It really relies on the symptoms that are presented after. But these technologies, like the computerized tomography, CT scan, and the MRI that was represented in the dance performance through Stacy, are useful to just make sure that after multiple concussions or one that was very severe, that the brain is not affected badly. So this is how the scanner looks. Some of you may have been exposed to that or have seen it in hospitals or places. And what I wanted to bring this slide because when I saw the dance show with Stacy, it was very nice to see that those balls in the hula, the little device that was developed for the performance, actually really captured the physics of the atoms and the protons moving within our heads, and the way that the scanner through the magnetic field makes them to align. Then it adds a pulse that is a radio pulse. They then respond to the pulse, And the time that they take to go back to alignment through the force of the magnet is what we measure and what allows us to produce the images of the brain, the images that will look like these ones on the right there. So concussions are very serious, but I want also to leave you with this idea that they necessarily do not have to be so concerning. Okay? They are serious. We need to be worried. We need to take good care. But past several concussions, people do recover. People do thrive and survive the concussions. So the hypothesis here is that if you have this cognitive reserve from youth into older adulthood, you have these advantages, this potential for the brain to cope with the effect of a concussion. So let's say you have a concussion or a couple, maybe you lose the advantage, but you're still in the norm. Now, if you have several, do we go into a decline that is forced earlier? And that's what researchers originally called the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, that you have heard. And this movie with Will Smith as the protagonist represented Dr. Benedict Omalu, who actually looks like this, make a big buzz, and it was good and bad. Good because it brought to everyone's attention the world of concussion in sports, those big cases, those athletes losing their minds, but also bad because it really exaggerated the truth and it really created issues. So the last message I want to leave you with is to debunk a little bit these over concerns around chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This is how it's supposed to look like in the brain. So you see a significant atrophy to the structures of the brain, meaning that there is loss of neurons, and so you have more room or space that is going to be filled with cerebrospinal fluid within the brain. But when the experts start developing the detailed neuropathology for the CTE, they listed that there could be atrophy, that the ventricles could enlarge, which are these cavities within the brain that contain the fluids, that there could be particularly this phosphorylated tau, a protein that you can see in the brain when it accumulates. You can only see it really post-mortem, like in those donated brains that we study doing necropsies. And what they believe is that those signs of tau were an indicator of this chronic traumatic encephalopathy in the aged or older athletes, oftentimes post-mortem. And we believe it, and we're very concerned. And the numbers were super high about the amount of retired athletes with history of concussions that were presenting with CTE. Well, all of this has gone down the road. This is an article by the Washington Post that says, from scientist to salesman, how Benedict Omalu, doctor of concussion, the movie, and his fame, built a career on distorted science. So we're slowly, in the scientific world of sport neuropsychology, debunking those concerns around CTE. Still possible to get CTE, but this original concept was developed after researching boxers who have dozens of concussions, direct hits up to the head, oftentimes losing consciousness in the field, in the ring, multiple times during a season. No time to recover between the concussions, and then they do present that kind of pathology, but very rare. So the studies that are being conducted now in retirees from the NHL and NFL are more and more demonstrating that they do not have the parameters to diagnose them with CTE. What they do have is normal aging. Who will be surprised? Or in some cases, a family history of dementia. So, it turns out that the mother and the grandfather both have Alzheimer's, and they may be genetically at high risk to also develop Alzheimer's. Or it turns out that they have depression even before they start engaging in the sports competitively. And those are the markers that are affecting the way the brain looks post-examination. So we are clarifying, and lots of literature really questioning this chronicity aspect, this uniqueness of CTE to sports, and the association between suicide risk, which is a big concern in the field, and the diagnosis of CTE. So lots and lots and lots of publications that are strongly recommending to reconsider. And almost to end, What we have also learned in this process, and mindful, I want to allow time for questions, is that what really matters is the background we come with before we have the concussion. So there are predictor variables of how well you will fare after experiencing a concussion. Some of those are those pre-injury factors like genetics and neurobiological vulnerabilities, or like having other illnesses that can put you in a more risk space. The trauma burden, so how many concussions you have, how you care for them, biomarkers, if the scanning, if the MRI came up with some indications of brain damage, then your likely term to recover will take longer because now the physical damage is more evident and is larger in the brain. But also psychosocial factors. So if you have a social support, like the networks, the information that Stacy shared with us, you see how it has this joyfulness and these memories that are all related to family and events and friends. That's exactly what supports the brain to recover. And the outcomes that we can look at could be health, could be psychological, could be neurological function, but it could also be life quality. Are people going back to a quality of life that is, that is worth living, that they're happy with? Now, the word that keeps coming, and hence the title, is resilience. Our brain, turns out, is quite resilient. It is aging, yes. It is declining in some of those tests, yes. But it's also getting stronger in many other ways, in the ways that we collect these memories, celebrate them, relish them, and continue advancing in like sharing them and using them. So the thought that came to mind as I was saying those words is that as Stacy was so willing to share with us the ping pongs with the memories, one of the most beautiful exercises that some researchers are starting to do is those conversations that happen around the table among friends, among family, when everyone starts evoking a story. Oh, you remember when I was 10 and I turned down the Christmas tree and everything was broken, and every part of the family adds to the stories, like, actually, it wasn't just you, it was also the dog, and you remember that the electrical power went off and there was a storm. And this collective memory exercises the brain beautifully. So there is the sense that that's how we hold into those precious memories, like those ping pong balls that are so vulnerable, with this sharing, with this bringing them back, with this using and reusing them, celebrating those. So finally, I would like to show you a little bit what we're moving towards the future. This idea of measuring again and again, so now longitudinally, so we can actually make a line of change. Also focusing in prevention and new interventions. I have students in the lab, very West Coasters, that are starting to look at psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and microdosing, and the possible effects on working with those psilocybin capsules in the recovery of athletes that are struggling through post-concussion aftermath. But we also want to incorporate not just those kinds of interventions that are very new and upcoming, but neuroimaging to really evaluate how the brain is changing and if the athletes have slightly strengthening of some networks just because of the physical activity that they do. And I would also like to thank, of course, my team, that everything that I show you is actually coming from them. I'm just kind of like the face here, just dressing up and showing off, but they are the brains behind the Cortex Lab. So my grad students, each one of them have a major task in these studies, and we have always newcomers to the lab, like these three in the next slide, if it comes up. So stop advancing. Oh, here it is. Maybe we had a delay. So these are newcomers to the lab. The one in the center here is actually works with us from Colombia. That's like the silver lining of COVID. We're able to engage via Zoom and all of these technologies. But wonderful group of people, bright minds, are constantly challenging me with new thoughts. We also have, of course, funding sources from all kinds of sources in Canada, like the NSERC, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, the Social Sciences of Humanities Research Council, the University of Victoria, private companies that we collaborate with, and of course you, because your attention, your curiosity, your interest in this kind of work is what makes this worthwhile. So thank you so much for your attention, and if you have questions, happy to address them. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that what you've just been saying, it's the nucleus of everything. And I think that that's the best lecture I've ever heard in my life.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that
When you
compliment.
presented it, these people that you talked about their help, but it's you persuading them by your presentation.
Oh, thank you very much for the compliment. Thank you so much. I hope that it has a long-lasting effect. Mhm.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I was going to say that that was a terrific presentation too.
Thank
I love
you.
the way you organized it and presented it. Can you just a little bit more about how things have changed, say for young children who are athletes who get a concussion? What is the difference between what we're doing these days and what we were doing 20 years ago?
Oh, absolutely.
Could you repeat-
So I will repeat the question for the Zoom. So
Yeah, thank you.
we have the question here in the audience about what are the specific changes in the treatment of concussion identification and recovery in children. You know, how has the protocols have changed now respect to what we did about 20 years ago, let's say. A major change has been our ability to diagnose them, to identify them. We're paying attention. Before, we were just saying, it's a bump in the head, keep playing, no, don't cry, you know? And a lot of these sports that have high incidence of concussions are overly represented by male players. So there was this sense that men are tough and they shouldn't cry and they shouldn't just be lifted up and keep going, and there's this proudness, and we all felt, parents and grandparents like, yeah, and everyone applauds when they race from the field and keep running and doing their thing. Now we're a little more cautious. We are trying to really educate the coaches, the parents, the athletes themselves to understand that it's okay to say my head hurts. It's okay to say I'm seeing stars. I feel like out of balance and I may fall. I may need a break. That is okay, that they are not going to be pulled out of the game permanently, that they're not going to lose, that the higher stakes are the brain health, not the game itself. That it should be fun, not so competitive. So we are developing things like that to lower the barriers to for the athletes to actually claim that they are, be able to express that they are suffering the concussions. But also we are trying to understand the forces and the mechanisms that produce concussion. So one of those studies is looking at how hitting the ball, for instance, in soccer, can have an impact long term, particularly at certain ages, because the skull is still getting stronger and developing. So policies have changed. Nowadays, kids under the age of 13 cannot do hitting practice in soccer. Unlike tackling in hockey, you cannot do tackling in hockey under the age of 13. Those were not things considered before. So those are some of the changes for the prevention and protection. In the treatment, one of the things that we thought about 10 years ago was that taking them off the field, the screens, the computers, their friends, putting them in a room to rest for 8, 9, 10 hours a day during the day in the dark was good. Now it's a big no. We need them to rest only for 24 hours and check with them. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Visit with your friends, have a good time. Watch maybe 30 minutes of your favorite TV show. Let's be in the table with everyone. And little by little, as they progress in the recovery, let them go back to the activities. We have learned that actually, when we put them in the dark room of sorts, when we isolate them, that tends to correlate with worsening of the aftermath of concussion. So it's not a recommendation anymore in those cases. And the good old advice that we always receive, like the normalizing sleep, so going to bed at the same time, having a good nutritious meals, controlling a little bit the screen time. Those are high recommendations that we're paying more and more attention, especially in the context of your question of pediatric. Absolutely. Yeah. Good question. Yeah, Dave?
Yeah, I just have a question that it regards to the measurement techniques that are used, particularly those of cognition and executive function. And having read a little bit in the area, it appears that there are some functions that kind of improve with age, whereas some actually decrease.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at developmental characteristics, the instrument that is used is going to be very important in terms of looking at the effects of. And I'm wondering whether you're looking at other measurement techniques rather than some of the standard ones that have been used with a non-aging population, and how that may impact this long-term development of the brain, particularly some of the functions of the brain?
Absolutely, great question. David's asking about the measurement issue, we call it in neuropsychology. And it is, are we using the appropriate tools to evaluate change and cognition and development on the right populations? Or are we borrowing tests that were developed for like the college students and now applying them to older adults and so forth? So that's a very good point. I think that in the kind of research I do, we have tried to move away from everything that is traditional, traditional in the sense of those paper and pencil bookless tests that we used quite a bit back in the day, because we want to really capture these new generations of older adults. We're also different than our older adults of the past. Imagine, think of your parents and your grandparents and how much you are accessing internet and knowledge, and you're engaged with computers and mobile phones, and all of that changed the way we address testing. So what we try to do is to create tests that are friendly to all ages so that we can actually use similar tests across different ages, but to have norms that are appropriate to the population that we are evaluating. And also demystifying a little bit that expectation that everyone at every age should do exactly the same kind of test performance. So we don't care so much about the scores, but about how you get to the solution of the problem. So for instance, there is a very famous task of problem solving where different age groups are put into the task of arranging the seating for a wedding. That's the problem. So there is a number of guests and there are rules. Like these people don't talk to these people, and we want in every table a balance between male and female, and we want in every table a balance of the party of the groom and the party of the bride, and those kinds of situations. It turned out that the older adults do the best in those kinds of exercises. They just take a little bit longer, because there's so many parameters. But the younger groups do it quicker, but no as efficacious. They miss some of the rules, or there's always somebody missing a position on the table that is appropriate. So it's one of those things that we start to consider. It's kind of like how we make it more appropriate for the population that we're evaluating. And then when we show those the clients, they're still considering what is expected, for that age group. Any other final question? We're out of time now, yeah.
Right on time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Mauricio. It was a very fascinating presentation. You covered a lot of different aspects, from aging to concussions, and I think it was said it was such a comprehensive and encouraging in a way. That's what we like to hear at our age, is things to encourage us, not to depress us. And I think you did that really, really well. So thank you to you and to Stacy for sharing your time with us this morning. Everybody who presents here volunteers their time, so we really do appreciate that. So thank you so much. Just a reminder to people here and those out there in Zoom land that there will not be any presentation next week. If people are locally here are interested, they're going to do an art show here. And it's the people that are in this organization displaying their art. And some of them are very, very good artists. And it's open to the general public. So if you wish to come, maybe buy a few paintings or just have a look and see what goes on here, you'd be more than welcome. So there will be a presentation the week after that, which I think is June the 4th, if memory serves me right. Okay, I'm always kind of cautious on that one. And that presentation on June the 4th will be by Dr. Theone Patterson. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at UVic, a visiting researcher at Baycrest Health Science Centre and the Rotman Research Institute in Toronto, and a registered psychologist in the province of BC with a declared competence in clinical neuropsychology across the lifespan. And her topic is going to be interactions between physical activity and mental and cognitive health. What do we know and what next? So I kind of love this series because it keeps coming up that one of the important things we can do as we age is to stay active, mentally and physically. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for those on Zoom. Apologies for the little bit of technical hiccup we had. It will be recorded well in the recording that you can upload, so the sound will be much better on that than it was here today. So thank you everybody again, and stay safe, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.